Hi guys, welcome to the Macros Bodybuilding and Powerlifting podcast. We have a very exciting show for you today because we're going to be going over some specific hypertrophy questions. And I know you guys love learning about muscle hypertrophy, how to grow your muscles best. We have Mike Israetel on the show, and this is going to be a special show because Mike is actually joining us in the UK again in London at the end of May, so the 27th and 28th of May. And we will be selling tickets at the end of March. So if you want to get in on those tickets, I'm going to put in a link in the description box below so you can sign up to our email list, get on there, you'll get the cheapest available tickets, and you'll get access to the VIP tickets where we'll actually be able to get into a gym and train with Mike, which will be invaluable. Not just because you'll be enjoying training with Mike and he can push you to your limits, but the fact you can actually associate with 10 other very well educated and hardworking individuals who want to be in the gym with Mike as well. And you'll be with Mike and you can actually go and say hello and kind of talk shop for a good amount of time. But without further ado, we will get into the questions. And actually, let's just, how are you doing, Mike? Let's just hear how you're doing.
Meh. I'm dieting right now for probably a show if I get in good enough shape. And I'm very much on schedule. I'm looking pretty close to my all-time best, probably a little better than that. And I'm about 8 weeks out, 7.5 weeks out. So definitely a good place to be.
Yeah.
It's I'm not so much reducing food from here. I will be reducing food later, but the food intake is already kind of like meh. It's not terrible, but it's not great. The volume of work and cardio and stuff like that is pretty intense. So all that combines the usual, but I'm hanging in there, so I should be able to think somewhat today for some questions and answers.
So yeah, guys, if Mike doesn't seem as chirpy as usual, give him a break because he's 8 weeks out, which if anyone's ever been 8 weeks out, it's tough. I'm dieting right now, but I'm in a deload and diet break, so I should be a much more chirpier, but I'm on a caffeine deload at the moment as well, so I might not be sounding as chirpy as usual. But we're going to stay right into the questions. So we've got Justine has asked quite an interesting question about biofeedback, like toe touching, things like that. I don't know if you've heard of the toe touch test for like biofeedback, how kind of flexible you are and whether or not you should do certain movements, and whether or not it's a useful tool in general or to kind of determine your MEV or MRV spectrum that you're kind of working within. Have you ever used any biofeedback tools? Someone else has also asked about heart rate variability and whether that's useful for kind of relating to what volume and how recovered you are and things like that, Mike.
Yeah, totally. That kind of stuff. Basically, so the flexibility tests probably test basal sympathetic muscle tone. So when your sympathetic nervous system is very overactive, as tends to result as fatigue increases, and your parasympathetic is very inactive, you're obviously by definition not engaging the part of the nervous system that potentiates recovery the most. And one of the side effects of that seems to be a reduction in short-term flexibility. It's when people say, they're warming up for a lift and they say they still feel super tight. One of those, results partially is increasing injury risk, but it's really telling you something else. It's saying that you're getting pretty high level of accumulated fatigue. Heart rate variability, and we just James Hoffman and I we're actually back on track writing the recovery book, which should be out this summer.
Brilliant.
We like to refer to the just heart rate variables in general because you can measure a couple of things about the heart: resting heart rate, morning resting heart rate, post exercise heart rate variability. They do indicate they do relate to total body fatigue. The problem with both of those tests and heart rate variability more so is that a lot of other things factor in there. So you have to get a really good, reliable baseline. And especially with heart rate stuff, that stuff only becomes noticeably and clearly off when you're already really fatigued. So I would say they're useful factors, but other factors are probably more useful and should be used in conjunction. For example, an easy one is bar weight feeling. How heavy does the bar feel of normal weights? If 225 feels, if 100 kilos feels like 200, boy, you're overreached and you don't need your heart rate to tell you anything other than that. Another one is the kind of performance you're getting. If your repetitions and sets and reps are keep going up and everything's fine, you're obviously not under recovered. But if you start to stall in performance, and especially if you're unable to repeat past performances, then you're screwed over. On the way to that happening, your general malaise and just general sense of dis-ease and desire of training will go down. And I think those things, bar rate feeling, desire to train, and performance usually outrank in just validity and reliability the other more advanced variables. The other very, very advanced variables seem very sciencey. But if you're keeping track of bar weight feeling, strength in the movements, and if you're keeping track of training desire, then a lot of the times when you do like the sit and reach test or something, and it says you're fatigued, your first kind of thought on that is going to be like, well, no shit. It's very rarely that test will pick something up before all the other factors come into play. And because you train hard anyway, and because you're always in tune with your desire to train, you can tell that stuff without adding anything to your monitoring program. So a big part of being economical with your training time and your investment in this process is using fatigue indicators of stuff that you normally pay attention to anyway. Instead of slapping something else on, you have to do more of something else to get some kind of esoteric value out of it. So like heart rate variability, you can track that. It takes an app, or it takes sitting around for a while to get a good resting heart rate. It's kind of a pain in the ass. Now, is it worth it? I mean, to get good results, yes. But can you use other stuff you track anyway, like desire to train, how heavy the bar feels, and how many reps you're getting? I mean, you can't avoid those. They're there anyway, right? The desire to train is just referentially available for you whenever you want to think about it. And if you're training regularly, all the other variables are available every weight room day. So why layer on another additive variable if you don't have that? The benefits of those other variables are particularly for strength conditioning applications when you're training entire teams of individuals. Then you need a standardized measurement. They can't subjectively, you don't want a lot of subjectivity. You want more objective measures. Heart rate variability is objective. It's just clearly defined. And flexibility measurements are clearly defined. And then you don't have to trust your athletes. They're trying to impress you with how not fatigued they are, or trying to lie to you about how really fatigued they are because they kind of learned fatigued. Then you give them deloads, which they like. And if, the opposite, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for team sports, et cetera, that kind of thing is very indispensable by strength coach, sports scientist. For individuals, especially those in bodybuilding training, I think they're the best term would be superfluous in many cases, redundant.
Cool. No, I think that's really interesting because I think there's a lot of allure to those sort of methods because people think they're going to be really kind of, I don't know, it's like another gadget that you can use to advance your training. 100%. But I guess if people can relate it to kind of testing your body fat or looking in the mirror to what body fat you are, kind of you're spending a lot more money kind of going and getting an actual kind of DEXA scan or something that might not be 100% accurate. Well, it's not 100% accurate. We know that. Whereas you can look in the mirror and kind of
absolutely
do a good guesstimate. Cool.
Yeah. And with a DEXA scan, et cetera, is something you might want to do every 3 months or so to get some good baselines. But, every week, just look in the mirror. It's going to tell you everything you need to know.
Awesome. Really, really well explained. And I think that will give a lot of people food for thought. And it will really help because that's giving some real direct tools that people can just think about, look at your performance, how are you doing, how are you feeling? And that will kind of guide when you're in the gym as well. So we're going to the next question, which is potentially quite a big topic. And Roberto Riccardiella, who you might have come across on Facebook, I think he's had some discussions with you on Facebook, or at least he was saying he did. And he asked a lot of questions about kind of the re-sensitization phase, the period of time where you have accumulated, well, for yourself, accumulated so much volume, you come to a period of time where you decrease volumes, focus on strength training, and kind of maintain weight. And he kind of talked about, is what really happening there just a detraining effect? And so when you come into hypertrophy training again, you kind of gain back the muscle that you had lost because you went into that period of time. Or could you just go into a lower volume hypertrophy block and let fatigue dissipate via that rather than going to a really low volume strength block? I think in a way he's kind of just trying to hear your real thoughts and reasonings behind kind of the resensitization block to dissipate fatigue, and just wants to learn more about it. So if you kind of go over it, maybe I'll be able to have some questions as you go through it.
Sure. So just to address the first question, no, it's not a detraining effect. I mean that we'd have to lose the underlying muscle tissue that we've gained, this detraining the hypertrophy. You don't actually lose size on a maintenance phase because you're training in I've determined, what I'm calling maintenance volume, the amount of training it takes to maintain your gains. There's a really, really cool fact about the body and about most physiological adaptive systems. New adaptations are very difficult to make. You have to present overload consistently. You have to go outside of your comfort zone. It's unsustainable training that way. But old adaptations you already have are incredibly easy to keep. So, for example, if you want to learn to speak French, French girls, mate, you know what I mean? Anyway, so you want to learn to speak French. How difficult is it going to be to learn to speak French? Holy crap. You have to go live in France for like a year, total immersion, a bunch of classes, speaking to everyone you can, talking all the time, listening to tapes, watching movies. And then after a year, you can probably learn to speak French pretty well. Second question, how hard is it to keep working understanding of French that within 1 or 2 weeks you can be back to your best ever French? You might watch like 1 or 2 French movies a week, speak to like 2 people for an hour at a time per week, and be as good at French as you ever were. In fact, actually continue to get better. So you could say that's common sense, but a lot of people, the things they say and the things they think, it doesn't seem to be as commonsensical because a lot of people will say, and there's this kind of myth about athletes um, that, if I don't train my hardest, I lose my gains. And that's not true. What's true is if you don't train your hardest and you're very advanced, you're just not going to make any more gains. But losing gains is very different from not making gains. So there's this volume right here that if you go, anything lower than that volume, you're no longer making gains. But the volume for losing gains doesn't start right here. It starts right here. There's this whole thing in between where you can train just hard enough, and it's not very hard at all. You don't lose muscle. Your body doesn't have the propensity to lose adaptations very well that it's gained, and especially that it's kept for a while. So, for example, I learned Russian up until I was age 7, and I talked to my parents maybe twice a week. I talked to a couple friends, maybe. So I speak a sum total of probably 30 minutes of Russian every week. My Russian is as good as it ever was. Definitely as good as when I was 7 years old, maybe in some ways better. So the same now that's a much more powerful language because neural systems, et cetera, are involved. But it's been very clearly shown that very similar things occur with muscle. And periodization is actually based on this for strength sports, is based on this fact. Go through a hypertrophy or work capacity phase, and you build a lot of muscle. When you transition to what's called a strength phase, you don't lose muscle. It's very common knowledge in the periodization world that you don't lose muscle doing sets of 5. That muscle that you gain doing sets of 10, for example, even though the volume is arguably sometimes half or even less, keep it. However, that reduction in volume means you're no longer presenting super high volumes and super high stimuli. It means you're not overloading all the time on the volume end and the metabolite end like you used to be. Systems that have been overloaded and producing gains for you because of overloading, after you overload them for long enough, they adapt less and less and less until you could keep overloading them all you want and they basically stay about the same. Is we're taking that stimulus and we're having it at least. It's enough to keep you at the same size. So don't be illusioned to think maintenance volume is going to get you jacked. It's by definition not going to do shit for you. But after a month or 2 of really low volumes, you've kept all of your muscle, but your body has so long gone without any actual really good stimulus and overload that all of the mechanisms designed to resist further adaptation, maybe not all, most of them have kind of been wiped clean. The clock has been set back. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I was going to make an analogy with food. I'm not really sure if it's correct. But I guess if you eat the same meals every day for a couple of weeks, you get really sick of them. But if you go another couple of weeks without eating those meals at all, eating other meals, it doesn't really matter how sick of them you got at first. You're back to being excited about them if it was food you like to begin with. Like I think we've all had like, you finish your cutting phase and you start cheating a little bit and you have pizza all the time, pizza, pizza, pizza. And then after a while, people are like, hey, you want to go out for pizza? And you're like, maybe something else. You take a couple of weeks off of pizza, you want pizza again. So these adaptive systems work in pretty much every regard. And the big key there is there's a very big difference between pushing the pace and maintaining. When you're maintaining, you're not really getting better at anything. But the fact that you're not getting better means you're not using the systems that make you better. We're intentionally keeping them dormant. And when they're dormant, when they're not being activated, they lose their adaptive resistance. When their adaptive resistance falls low enough, we start cranking them again and getting gains. So I would say the best analogy or the best kind of little metaphor or a little like statement about this process is you take one step forward or 3 steps forward rather, and then you stop for a bit. You don't take any steps back. Then you take 3 steps forward and you stop. I actually have a really good analogy for this one. Imagine you're on a long hike through the Norwegian wilderness or something like that. You're a 50-mile hike. You have tents and gear, and it's summertime, so you're not going to freeze to death. But you got all your gear with you, and you and your friends are going for a 75-kilometer hike, and it's going to take you 3 days, right? When you stop and camp, you rest, you recover, you recuperate, and you become better at walking again after, right? Because otherwise, you're going to eat your feet off your fucking body. Ground when you rest and set up camp. No, you're not fucking on a glacier that keeps moving back. I mean, unless you are, and then you're fucked up. But if you just get to a waypoint that's 25 kilometers in, you stay there overnight. We can't say you took 25 kilometers forward and something back. You didn't go back at all. Did you make progress? No, but you did take that time to recover. That's how I would see a maintenance phase. So there's no reason to subsume that you're losing muscle. You're really not. And if you think you are, easy solution to that. Just give it one shot. Do 3 months of hypertrophy training, do 1 month of maintenance. Because your muscles are not pumped and swollen from their damage, and because the volumes are so low, they're going to feel small, and you're going to be like, fuck, Dr. Israetel lied to me. He's a cocksucker. Parts of that may very well be true, but I'm not lying. So next, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to hypertrophy training after a month, and you're going to be like, this fucker lied to me. About a week and a half in, when you get pumped and sore, you're going to look as good as you ever did. You're going, oh my God, oops, it looks like it didn't go anywhere. And then you're just going to make great gains after that for another 3 months. If you keep going, however, you're going to be in a situation where you're spinning your wheels. And here's the real big problem. Somebody like Jared Feather, who uses a bit more of the technical terminology when describing this to people, would say, we have every time we present more of a stimulus, we get a rise in anabolic signaling pathways, something like mTOR. So mTOR gets hit more and more and more and more the more volume you do over the span of maybe 3 months. Deloads here and there, but on average up. The problem is that catabolic regulators, something like AMP kinase, also get stimulated more and more as you go up. Now, at first, AMPK is here and mTOR is here, or some similar kind of systems. And it goes like this, but AMPK eventually meets mTOR and eventually goes above it. So you can actually be if you train for 4 months like a psychopath and you just keep training, at best, I think you're in a position where you're making very few gains or no gains at all, even though your training volume is super high. So here's the deal. You're not making any gains, but you're not resting, so you're not preparing to make any future gains. You're fucking spinning your wheels. The only thing it's affording you is you can eat a bunch of calories because you burn a lot of calories with those crazy workouts. The problem is you're also damaging your joints and other tissues, etc. You're carrying chronic high levels of fatigue. That's how you get fucked up eventually and get hurt. The worst case, which is very possible, I've actually done this to myself before. You train long enough, you actually start to lose muscle pretty slowly because you're so high over you end up being over your MRV, right? To put it in another technical term, your recovery capacity is right here, okay? For your recovery ability is right here for your MRV. And, you start at your minimum effective volume, beginning of the mesocycle, you go to your MRV and you come back down to minimum effective, you go to your MRV. Eventually, the amount of volume, because of the adaptive resistance rising of these mechanisms that hypertrophy you, eventually the amount of volume it's going to take to hypertrophy you is above your MRV. It's theoretically completely out of reach for you. So if you say, okay, last month I did an average of 15 sets for back, this month an average of 20, next month it's going to take an average of 25, the month after it's going to take 30, but your MRV is 25. So what the fuck is that fourth month even for? You literally put yourself in such a position that your adaptive abilities are out of reach of your recovery abilities. So you have two choices. So you go see the local neighborhood steroid dealer behind GNC, get a bunch of drugs, fuck up your health, and just MRV is not really a thing anymore. It still is. I'm just joking, but it's higher, right? Like, I don't have to worry about sports science as much. Or you take a maintenance phase and get your MRV back to 15. Oh, I'm sorry, your MRV. You get your your MAV, right, maximum adaptive volume, back to around 15 sets.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can hit 15 sets again for a mesocycle average and grow, then 20 and grow, then 25 and grow, and then you can do that over and over again. So to put it in another technical way, your maximum adaptive volume falls during the maintenance phase. And that's a good thing because it's gotten so high that your MAV starts to push up and past your MRV. I mean, that fucking blows, right? Because if your maximum adaptive volume is now theoretically above your maximum recoverable volume, it's literally impossible by definition for you to adapt at your fastest rates. And then here's the worst part. I'll put it in these volume landmarks again. Minimum effective volume goes above your MRV. That's what happens if you train for like 5 or 6 months, and then you legit cannot grow anymore. And the worst part is you get so resistant to training or to adaptations, your maintenance volume can exceed your MRV because by this point, your fatigue is probably so high, your MRV is lower, right? So your MRV and maintenance volume pass each other up. You just literally lose muscle, even though you're training 30 sets a week or something like that. Don't want to be in that position. There's three fundamental ways that people get around this. Two of them kind of fucking suck. One of them is the advocated intentional 1 month or so of low volume training. The first one, the worst by far, is guys will fucking train. They no longer get a lot of training. They start taking a bunch of drugs. They can't take any more drugs because their doctor's like, you're going to fucking die if you keep pushing that much trend. And they go, fuck. And they keep trying to train anyway. And then they get hurt. They come off a bunch of drugs. They lose a bunch of muscle. But since the myonuclear domain ceiling has already risen and new nuclei have been assimilated, etc., they 2-3 months, they stay off all the drugs. They have a life change. They start going to fucking church again or some shit like that. They get off Facebook for a while, like, hey, I'm off Facebook. It's too toxic. It's too many fucking too terrible environment. And then, they get the hunger back after 2 months. They come back. They start training again. They get bigger again. So they took instead of a maintenance phase, they took a fucking completely lost phase, which is better than nothing, but it happened because they got hurt, right? So it's like a lot of guys will just train till they get hurt, auto maintenance, right? And then the other way is guys will kind of, they'll reach a point of kind of more of an intuitive maintenance phase. Well, they'll train, and they just won't get pumps anymore. They won't get sore anymore. Here's the thing. You can actually reduce your level of DOMs almost to zero if you push your training hard enough. Is in some ways connected to adaptation. Remember, high-level runners and cyclists who have huge activities of catabolic regulators, AMP kinase, and very low mTOR activities, they don't get delayed onset muscle soreness. They get a different diffuse kind of soreness in bones, joints, and muscles. It's not that really hard kind of soreness, that really immobilizing soreness that lasts for a couple of days and then goes away completely. It's kind of like a perma soreness. You start getting that instead of delayed onset muscle soreness. I'm not sure if you've ever been there yourself, Steve, but like you do pec flies and do bench, and the next day your pecs are just kind of like, fuck, I don't know what happened. They never got pumped. They actually look smaller the day after because they're depleted of glycogen. And there's not that painful, awesome soreness of like, fuck, I'm doing shit.
I've definitely had
You start
that.
getting that. For sure, man. It's from doing too much work. I've had that before. And you get that, and then you get like a lack of pumps in the gym. Like you're there doing fucking sets of 10 and fucking dick is happening. And you're like, fuck this. And people will intuitively try different exercises, try to do the feel more of the squeeze, some lighter work, say my body needs a break. And somehow they end up intuitively training less. They get their adaptive proclivity back, and then they hit it hard again. Like you do barbells for a while, they fuck you up so bad that you're like, time for machines and literally squeezing the isolation and doing body weight lunges. That shit is effective in its own merit to some extent, but it's just less of a stimulus, so you kind of get a break because the shit is that easy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the second way to do it. It's better than the first by a long shot. Some more advanced bodybuilders that have been around for a while, they do the second method. The third method is probably more recent for a lot of people that aren't students of periodization. It is intentional, willful insertion of a maintenance phase into your mesocycle, into your macrocycle structure. And that's a really good idea because you might not even feel like doing it, but it does the body a lot of good. And you'll thank yourself. And every time, and here's the thing, I don't want to come off as high and mighty and all-knowing and pedantic. I'm sure as fuck all-knowing. Folks, I have all the same fears and bullshit little anxieties that all the rest of you motherfuckers do. For example, every time I take a maintenance phase, I feel like I'm losing my muscle. I freak out. I don't want to do it. I hate it. I start to like it a little later when I realize, oh, I don't have to eat around the clock anymore, and I don't have to watch a bunch of shit. I only have to train 4 times a week. It's amazing. I can relax. I can enjoy family and friends. But at the beginning, especially, I'm like, like when your whole life's around training and eating, and your diet consists of eat minimum of this much protein, everything else doesn't matter. And then your training is 4 times a week of just compound bullshit, and you're just like, well, fuck, what's my purpose here? Like, I literally had like
Hmm.
damn near existential crisis last time I went to maintenance over the holiday break. I was like, I don't understand my own purpose in life. And so we, for sure, nobody fucking likes that shit. But you put it in place because you know it's good. And the way you know it's good is either you trust the science if it's your first time, or you trust the science and you trust previous experience. I trust the science well and good, but what I do now is I think, how did I feel after my last maintenance phase that I took? Oh wow, I had a revelation, I had a rebirth. And this time I reminded myself of that shit. Sure enough, just a month ago, or like 6 weeks ago, I started training hard again. I finished my maintenance phase. I swear to God, like, 2 weeks in, I was in the gym and I pulled my shirt off, just a tank top with a pump, and I was like, fuck. I was training at like 2/3 of the volume I had been the last time I looked like that. I felt completely fatigue free. I felt incredible, and damn near nothing at all was stimulating me. And I was already at my biggest ever. And I know a bunch of my fat had gone away because I, upped the training volume again. So you get a recomposition effect. That's how advanced people can get recomposition. So as soon as you're done with the maintenance phase, I promise there is, pun intended, there's a renaissance there that occurs. There's a rebirth, and it's great every time. And remember that the dedicated athlete doesn't do what he feels like doing or what she feels like doing. They do what they must. And sometimes, for example, if you really think you're a fucking warrior, which kudos to you, in some sense you very much are, does a warrior draw both of his swords and run into battle? And no matter how many people are coming at him, he fights everyone and potentially dies doing it? No. A warrior knows when a tactical retreat is necessary to rest, recover, maybe move around the enemy, and then fucking win. That's what warriors do. They win, right? And it would say, a warrior, somebody like, so for example, like a real warrior would be someone that would pretend to be on the other side just to get the trust of their king to fucking stab him in his fucking sleep 80 times and win the fucking war. That's a real badass motherfucker. That's somebody who does what it takes. It'd be like, other people, they come back winning for their kingdom, and their fellow, knights and stuff would be like, what was it like to worship a king that wasn't yours and one you hated? You're like, it fucking blew. What do you think it was like? But I did what it fucking took. We won, didn't we? To be like, God damn, you really are a warrior. That's a fucking warrior. Everybody likes going to battle with their fucking swords drawn, stabbing people. That's fine. Uh, it can sometimes be uncomfortable. Sometimes a retreat is necessary. And to reiterate, a maintenance phase is not a retreat. It feels like one. It's just a break. It's just a break to hold your abilities. You don't lose them. It feels like you're losing them because your muscles deflate a little bit, but I promise that's not tissue. After you do that, and the wave comes back in again, your training is the best as it's ever been again. You make all the great gains, and you go, oh, okay, fuck, this is part of the process. Same logic with deload, same logic with rest days. And if you didn't like anything I said, fuck you. 7 days, team no days off, 2 days, go grind yourself into the dirt. I'll fucking bring a rose to your funeral, but you'll be huge or whatever in the casket. That's all that matters.
So what you're saying is you revive stronger out the other side. That's what you were
Man,
saying.
I couldn't have put it. I couldn't have put it better.
So actually, I'm glad you brought up the deload scenario, because the kind of AMPK and mTOR kind of relationship you're talking about very much related to, for me anyway, to the fitness fatigue model. A lot of people know, in that then when fatigue starts kind of going above your fitness and then you come into a deload, it's kind of like an extended deload in a sense. And I guess a question some people might have is, would a deload not be long enough to dissipate the fatigue? So you have to actually go through like an extended period of time, like you said, a month.
That's a really good question. To reduce the kinds of fatigue that build up over a week, you need light sessions or recovery sessions, and you need off days. It's on the same order of time scale. To recover from the kinds of fatigue that accumulate over a month, you need about a week, a deload, to reduce those. There are other kinds of fatigue, particularly one of them being general adaptive resistance to hypertrophy, that take 3 or 4 months to rise. They take maybe a month to decline. So it's all proportional. We're reducing fatigue at every single time scale based on the kind of fatigue that it is. Now, there's definitely based on the kind of fatigue that it is. So a kind of fatigue, you could say, or a side effect of training for too long is a reduction in adaptive resistance. Another kind is joint damage. When your bones fragment and your joints get hurt in a micro tear fashion, the shit doesn't heal after a week. That's fucked up, right? That takes a month, which is another great benefit of the maintenance phase. Because of the low volume, things recover much better, and that you're literally, for me, by the time I got to my last maintenance phase, I had like 3 fucking injuries. Like nothing fucking worked anymore. With a combination of jujitsu training and bodybuilding, I was like a fucking, I was like a scarecrow or something. I didn't even remember what injuries I had. Like, no joke. I was like, what the fuck was hurting my shoulder? I don't even know. Like intuitively, you know what you hurt. Like when it hurts, you're like, obviously it's this. And then like a week later, it doesn't hurt. You're like, what was it that hurt? Was it back there? Was it? I don't even know. Right. So there's all kinds of that stuff gets taken care of in the maintenance phase, adaptive resistance being one of those things. But I'm not saying all fatigue dissipates over a month. Oh, I'm sorry. All fatigue will dissipate over a month, but there's kinds of fatigue that dissipate at much shorter time scales. Thus, for example, you could call me on bullshit if I said, that month is for glycogen repletion. Glycogen repletion doesn't take fucking month. Are you out of your fucking mind? And I would be, right? That just takes a couple of days, sometimes 3 to 4 days if you've been really fucking shit up. And that's what deloads are for. Deloads are to heal nervous system disruptions and abilities, fatigue at that level, and a variety of other things. So at different time scales, we have different fatigue elements that are recovered. When the recovery book comes out, we have some articles on Juggernaut that talk about this pretty well. It's addressed in Scientific Principles of Strength Training to a pretty good extent, and the fatigue management chapter. But these different fatigue sorts and the timescales, I've already written this part of the recovery book. We beat it to death. It's like 30 pages of shit you never wanted to read about different timescales and different particular sources of fatigue. It's not technically fatigue, but it results as a byproduct of high levels of fatigue over a long time and just high levels of pushing the same pathways in the same exact way. And it has to be brought down. Am I confident that it's exactly a month? No. Do I think it's probably longer than a week or 2? Yes. Do I think you need like 2 months every time? No, although some people might in some circumstances. So a month is just a good general framework, and you can see how it goes from there.
Cool. And I think something that actually is really nice with that is it relates to kind of the refeeds, the kind of diet breaks, and then the maintenance phases for dieting as well. And as a lot of those associated kind of time scales relate really well.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'd actually like to add something really quick. One of our coaches at Renaissance has been going through this with a couple of clients, and it's very pertinent now, at least in my mind. There is value in receding from pushing your diet at all for some periods of time. And what I mean by is this. Yes, a mass phase is a welcome respite from a cutting phase. You get tons of food. It recovers a bunch of the psychology behind dieting. What it does not recover is the meticulousness. Massing requires less meticulousness, but you still have goals. And the goals are fairly elaborate, and the goals are difficult. They're not self-fulfilling. Right? If you just eat whatever you want and just take in a minimum of protein, that's the easiest fucking thing in the world. Massing, it's like you don't want any more food, but you have to have it. If you did a workout and your friends are like, hey, you want to go to this party really quick? And you're going, oh, yeah, I got to stop by and get food, though. It's an inconvenience. You have to think of things ahead of time in a more complex fashion. The bigger you get, and potentially if you start using performance-enhancing drugs that interact with nutrients differently, insulin growth hormone, for example, your massing phase is just about as rigid as your cutting phase. And that's where the term clean eating largely still has huge weight in the bodybuilding community. When you're on growth hormone and insulin, you don't just eat pizza all the time. Really, really bad news would come of that. So the reality there is that drug-free or not, massing and cutting both accumulate psychological fatigue. They're both very purposeful, intricate endeavors. When you do a maintenance phase for your training and you drop your volume by a lot and just do basically strength training, a couple sets of 5 or 6 reps here and there, what you can do, and what I highly recommend, is setting yourself protein target for retention of lean mass, 2 grams per kilo or something like that, and calorie target. And a calorie target could be really rough. Just watch your body weight, make sure it doesn't do anything crazy like falling or rising. And the rest of it, literally, just fundamentally stick to decent, healthy foods maybe half the time. The other half, just fuck off and eat whatever you want. So as long as you're getting the protein and your calories aren't wildly high or wildly low, fundamentals of healthy eating still apply, but then just whatever, right? On my last maintenance phase, I had a bunch of, a diner food and snacks and cookies and this and that. As long as I had protein, I was good to go. What that does is it's a month. Will your physique suffer? Yes, it will, a tiny bit. You won't lose any muscle. You won't really gain a ton of fat, but you look a bit softer and stuff like that. Incredibly reversible within 2 weeks, for sure, at longest. But what it gives you is a month of breathing almost, with protein accepted. And let's be honest, not no one, an incredibly tiny number of people find, if they've been in the fitness industry for long enough, getting in enough protein is difficult. And if it is, just have a casein shake in the morning and another big casein shake at night, and then eat whatever the fuck you want throughout the day, and it doesn't matter anyway, right? But protein's tasty, and there's burgers and shit like that you can eat. Protein and not fucking up your calories too much makes you yearn for controlled dieting later. I'm not sure if you've ever been in a psychological situation yourself, Steve, but you've been eating fuck all for so long that you're like, God, I can't wait to have structured, ordered, clean meals that make me feel purposeful. I don't want to be free anymore. And that kind of stuff, it's like summer vacation from school. Good students in school, they don't want summer vacation to go on forever. You get to that point in like late August where you're like, what the fuck? Like, I can only play video games with my friends and climb on trees for so long. I want to do stuff, right? And school is by the end of June or July or June, when May or whatever when school ends, nobody wants to be there. But at the beginning, people get excited for school because you're like, finally, some fucking structure in my life. Same idea. So I would recommend not only doing that maintenance phase for training, I would recommend that maintenance phase for dieting and really regressing back into just meeting protein needs and then not really worrying about a lot of stuff. Will that make you, if you were an alien machine that had no human desires or temptations or accumulated psychological diet fatigue, would it be better that you just were rigid all the time? Of course, but you're not that. If you want a productive career in fitness, whatever your choice, powerlifting, weightlifting, bodybuilding, etc., if you every literally 2 months out of the year do less restricted eating, you're going to refresh yourself so much that when other people are talking about, oh my God, I can never diet again, the sight of broccoli makes me ill, I'm never going to restrict again, fuck dieting, it's all like patriarchy and all this bullshit made me do it, and fuck the scale, they're breaking scales, you're going to be like, I see where they're coming from, but I don't feel that bad about it because I've given myself these occasional freedoms. So.
No, yeah, I can totally relate, and I wanted to rip it out of you with the school thing and just call you a nerd, but I completely relate to loving structure and routine and wanting kind of to advance. So yeah, I was probably too good a student. That's why I can't rip it out of you.
There you go.
No, yeah, I love that, and I think the psychological elements are really underrated, and kind of people do get scared, but I think if you just kind of embrace it, and that's the best thing that people can do in those sort of situations. But I think that answers that question really, really well, Mike. Unless you've got anything else to add, we can get to the next one.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome. So Ryan Solomon has asked, and this might have been related kind of to well, actually, it relates to everything we've talked about. Would it be practical to work from your MEV to your MRV as slowly as possible, potentially stretching mesocycles out to 8 to 12 weeks long, to spend more time training and overreaching? So you're kind of trying to stay in that maximum adaptive volume state for as long as possible.
Great question. The answer is no. Here's why. The first reason we can't do that, or we shouldn't, is that, and I've stated this before every time I've defined maximum adaptive volume, MRV is a number. it's a range, but it's a pretty tight range you can figure out for yourself. Minimum effective volume is also a pretty tight range. Maximum adaptive volume is almost like the analogy would be as like a quantum concept. It's like Schrodinger's cat. You open up the box, there's no cat. You close the box, there's a cat. So the fuck you ever see the cat? You don't ever fucking see the cat. Same thing with maximum adaptive volume. What happens is it is any volume you ever do, you've already adapted to. It is no longer your maximum adaptive volume. A meaningfully higher volume is. So every time, let's say you start out, you're pretty not undertrained, but you're pretty fatigue reduced, and you haven't done high volume training in a while. So you start out, your MEV is 10 sets per week, and your MRV is 20 sets per week. When you just start out, okay, we can say your MAV is 15 sets a week average, but that's not your MAV. When you just start out with a new combination of exercises, sets, and rep ranges, and you're very fatigue reduced, your maximum adaptive volume is probably between 10 and 12 sets per week. It's pretty low on that end. It's waiting for you. As soon as you hit it, you've adapted to it within that week, you need more. Overload applies. If you just repeated that week, you'd get a little bit less adaptation, a little less, a little less, a little less. So if you repeated it for 4 weeks, after a while, it's your MEV again. So it's minimum still. And eventually it'd be your maintenance volume if you kept that shit up for way, way long. So you hit it 10 to 12. The next week, your MAV has basically advanced as literally the adaptations are being made. Your MAV, maximum adaptive volume, has advanced to 12 to 14 sets. You hit 12 to 14 sets to try to chase it. Then it has advanced again next week, 16 to 18, blah, blah, blah. So your MAV starts by your MEV and it floats up to your MRV. It eventually floats past it, but you can't follow it there. Does that make sense? So that's when you need to deload. But here's the critical factor. It jumps and you have to follow. If you don't follow fast enough, you're milking out suboptimal gains. Does that make sense? So let's say you're still at around 10 sets per week, but your MAV has flirted away and it's at 15 sets per week. You're not at your MAV anymore. You may very well like to tell yourself you're there, but you're not getting the best gains. You're getting shitty gains, MAV gains, right? And so that by itself is a problem, right? So we need to follow it plain and simple to get the best gains. But you could say, now let's just milk out each step. Okay, we start here at the MEV. It jumps right away, MEV does, but we'll jump with it and then milk it out until it doesn't do anything. We'll jump up again, milk it out, jump up again. That allows us to stretch our men's cycle out a lot. There's a problem with that. Accumulated fatigue still occurs. Even if you train at your minimum effective volume, your fatigue over time goes up. It only doesn't go up if you train at your maintenance volume. Okay, maintenance volume fatigue just goes like this. Matter of fact, if it was high, it falls and then it stays flatlined, basically nothing. So even at your minimum effective volume, because that means you are presenting an overload, fatigue is going to start to climb. And if you do, let's say you can do, if you're training at an average of your MAV 15 sets a week, that amount of fatigue, of an average of 15 sets a week, maybe starting at 10 and to get 20, lets you train for 6 weeks without getting past your MRV. There's too much accumulated fatigue. Then maybe if you just stayed between 10 and 12 sets, it could give you 10 weeks of time. But then you have to ask another question. Okay, so it's not infinite, right? It's still only 10 weeks, and then after that, it climbed anywhere. Then you have to ask yourself, the time that I spent, was it worth staying this low? Because remember, yes, you can train for longer, but your adaptations suck more. And it probably doesn't balance out. So the reality of the matter, because fatigue, and mark my words, fatigue always climbs when you're creating a meaningful stimulus. If you're presenting an overload, which by definition, MEV is that minimum overload required to disrupt homeostasis enough to get some gains, fatigue is accumulating, period. It doesn't. Every single biological structure ever discovered. So because you're above MEV, your fatigue is on the clock. And when fatigue is on the clock, right, you had better be using your time most productively, which means you should be jumping with MAV as it goes up and doing maybe a 6-week accumulation as opposed to doing 2 terrible things. One, milking out the shit for as long as possible. You'll get fatigued and you'll have to quit anyway. And you'll be like, well, what did I get all of this? Well, I trained for 10 weeks. How much gain did I get? Not much. or you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna fuck shit up, just go right to MRV. You'll train for 2 weeks and you'll have to deload, and then you're taking too many deloads too often. So the situation there is, because MAV is an adaptive value, because it jumps, you have to follow it, and because fatigue is running the clock anyway, you might as well follow it at its pace, because if you try to go too slow, fatigue times you out anyway. It's almost like this. If we go on a long road trip, we want to be most economical with gas. We want to get the furthest we can with our gas. Is it a good idea to leave the car in idle and go like 3 kilometers an hour down the road? No, because we'll fucking not get anywhere that way. And by the time we get somewhere that way, first of all, it'll take us forever to fucking get there. Other people will just pass us by. And by the way, they can take maintenance phases more often than us. So if it takes us 12 fucking weeks to do an accumulation phase, they could have done an 8-week baller ass adaptation phase, 4-week maintenance phase, on average gotten better results than us, and then restarted when
Mhm.
we still need a maintenance phase after 12 weeks, right? Because we're still at the end of it, right? So it's like someone going 70 kilometers an hour or 100 kilometers an hour, going to a petrol station, actually getting refueled, and then going again at 100 kilometers an hour. Now, is it a good idea to go 140 an hour? Like, well, only if you have the right car for it, right? But no, because it's too fast, you'll burn out. There's a risk of injury, blah, 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 etc. But we don't want to idle the fucking car and be under this illusion, because remember, we're on the clock anyway. We're on the clock, and gas is still burning. Whether or not you burn it slow or fast, it still burns. You still have to go to the same refueling station, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So because of those constraints, I would say we want to resist the temptation to milk out the gains, because what we really end up doing is we just never get close to our MAV. You want to be able to tell yourself, oh, the ultimate mesocycle is one in which you hit your MAV every single time you train. So for the 5 weeks of accumulation, your MAV average is going to be 15 sets, but it turned out every time you trained, you basically trained your maximum adaptive volume. That's by definition the best gains. You can't do any better than that.
Mhm. No, I really like that, because I think a lot of these questions actually, and a lot of the topics that people got onto with muscle building, is trying to avoid these periods of like not training or like deloading maintenance phases. They're trying to avoid these, but these are the same people that want maximum results. They want to train balls to the wall, but that by default doesn't really happen if they want to kind of get rid of these things, because they're going to actually just eke out gains. And something that reminded me of this process is someone who maybe diets very, very slowly rather than doing it more assertively, but under control and getting kind of the maximum amount of fat loss. Because sure, they might have to break sooner, they might have a diet break sooner, but they're going to lose a lot more fat in a short period of time versus that person that just trickles along for a long, long period of time. And they're still
Absolutely.
having to break.
Absolutely. Absolutely agreed.
Cool. Have we got time for any more questions, or should we get to the next lot in another time?
Let's do one more.
Perfect. Right, we've got one from Ruby Cherie, who has asked about using kind of medium intensity steady state or low intensity steady state after training. And she said legs, but just after training, will that diminish hypertrophy? I know we've kind of slightly talked about this before, but yeah, doing cardio after your weight training, what's that impact?
Yes, it will reduce your gains. And let me be clear about that. It will reduce your gains, and not necessarily your current level of musculature. You won't get smaller doing it unless you're very advanced, but you will not get as big as you could have gotten. After training, the nervous system signaling to the muscles has to be one of parasympathetic, it has to be one of rest for the muscles to prepare themselves to make the adaptations nervous system wise that they were exposed to, strength adaptations, etc., and to prepare the muscle internally for anabolic state. The biochemical activity of the muscle, AMPK versus mTOR, for example, needs to be predominantly anabolic in nature and not catabolic. And the nutritional environment in the muscle needs to be one of a reloading of glycogen, of high insulin levels, of plenty of food coming in to prepare all that machinery to start turning and yielding you gains over the next several hours and days. So the ultimate thing to do if you're done training is to rest, relax, recover, and eat. Specifically, higher glycemic carbohydrates with fast-acting proteins. That's how you get the best results. As you can tell, cardio after training does not allow for recovery of the nervous system. It continues to activate catabolic signaling mechanisms. And even if some people say, well, is it okay if I do cardio after, but I take my workout shake? Your workout shake is going to be burned up by the cardio. It's going to come in and it's going to get burned up, and not much of it is going to go to the muscles you're supposed to be recovering. So there's a nutrient demand there that goes to the cardio instead of going to the muscles, or at the very least is split partially, and then if it's just suboptimal. So I would say to the advanced individual, the first choice you have to make is what's more important to you, getting better at aerobic pursuits or getting better at weight training pursuits. If aerobic is way more important to you, then you probably need to do aerobic first and then weights after. If it's about of even importance, because weights are high intensity and aerobic is lower, and you can always do pretty decent aerobic effort, even if you're tired from weights, but not the other way around. You do the Alex Viada hybrid method, and you do weights first, aerobic second. If you are really interested in muscular developments and not so interested in being good aerobic athlete, I would highly advise to do your cardio either a little bit before the training session, not a lot, or just at another time of the day altogether. And I think the best athletes in that regard do split sessions. So I never do my cardio in combination with training, almost ever. And I almost always just come back 4 to 6 hours later after a couple of meals, after some rest, after relaxation, especially on legs. And on my hardest leg day, unless I'm very, very hardcore dieting, I don't even do cardio. I'll do legs in the morning and I'll do dick the rest of the day while I eat a lot. So that's the situation that it takes to promote the best muscle growth. So just be familiar with the trade-offs. Be realistic. If it's 20 minutes of jogging after weights, whatever. We're barely going to notice the difference. If it's serious kilometers on the track after weights, you will pay for it. You'll pay for it less if it's at another time during the day. So that's my best advice on the matter.
Cool. No, I think that's really good because I mean, a lot of people, I mean, you talked about kind of it will blunt muscle growth. It won't kind of necessarily take away from your current gains. And I think a lot of people do the cardio like, and they're in kind of a dieting, maybe even they're in like contest prep or something, and they do their cardio after their workouts. And what you're saying is basically that will that'll blunt muscle growth. And because you're in that catabolic state anyway, because you're dieting, that could potentially lead to
lose muscle.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And actually something I have heard recommended, and I mean, in the past, I'd even recommend it myself, but I don't, because I don't recommend high intensity training, kind of interval training anymore, particularly for anyone, is to do that hit after your leg workout, because then you've got longer to recover. Because obviously if you do it on separate days, then it impacts recovery. I guess that kind of gets to the reason hit for fat loss is a lot of the time not worth it.
Exactly. And that's something I talked to Jared Feather about actually yesterday. It was a real productive discussion.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. HIIT training is not for advanced bodybuilders. And advanced bodybuilders don't fucking do HIIT training. They just don't. And people are, oh, these are their bros. They're stupid. You try squatting 600 for reps twice a week and leg pressing 1,000 or whatever and fucking doing HIIT training when you weigh 280 fucking pounds. It doesn't work. That's why they do the lowest intensities. I can put this in very technical terms. The number one reason bodybuilders do low intensity cardio only, they have a total MRV of training to fill up. They're going to want to fill up as much as possible with one of two things. Things that fatigue very little but burn a lot of calories, low intensity steady state cardio, or things that build the most muscle / retain the most muscle, weight training. So when you're a bodybuilder, you either train with weights or you do very, very low intensity cardio. Anything in between that range gives you neither the benefit of anabolism nor the benefit of a low fatigue fat burning state. High intensity limiter training is great for people who only work out 3 or 5 days a week, or maybe 3 days a week, and they want to lose some fat. They don't want to be in the gym for forever. 3 weekly high intensity interval cardio sessions, even after your workouts, totally great. You'll get into great shape. If you want high level results beyond great shape, there's a very big difference between, and people conflate this on social media all the time, and it's not really anyone's fault. It's just sometimes the implications are lost. There's a huge conflation between excellent results for the person who is in recreational fitness and optimality. Okay? There's a really easy way to define optimality. It is when somebody hands you your 3rd place bodybuilding trophy and you think back to what you did and you ask yourself, is there anything I could have done to take 1st instead? Yes, then you were not optimally programming. But if you walk in, you have abs, you go to your, there's a summer party at your work, and it's at the local pool or it's at, you know, at the ocean or something, and you take off your shirt and you have abs and all your coworkers are like, fuck, you look amazing. Do you need to science the shit out of your training? No.
Mm-hmm.
You can just put in good hard work, a lot of hit training, and be very economical with your time, and all is well. But you're going to leave some things. There's differences emerge from those two things.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go to a coworker's party and I pull my shirt off, people, the police get called. What the hell happened to you? That's not a human being. So
amazing. So I think if people do want to do, like you said, the cardio on the same day, then it is to split it kind of those 4 hours so you can recover.
The further apart, the better.
Adapt. Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. So I think we have some more questions we can get to another time, which would be really, really good. And I just want to again thank Mike for joining us. And I want to remind you guys that this is only a taster of what you can imagine you'll get if you come to London on the 27th of May, where Mike will be presenting the scientific principles of hypertrophy and all that nitty-gritty stuff that you know you want to know. And that will be happening. So definitely check out the link below.
Yeah, it'll be great. And we're going to talk about super, super advanced concepts. My recommendation for folks signing up is read the stuff that I've written about the volume concepts. I'll have more stuff coming out explaining that stuff soon. Read Scientific Principles of Strength Training is a really good idea. Some of the stuff we're going to be, the regular stuff that we talk about, general recommendations, is not going to be the topic of this conference. This conference is going to be almost exclusively advanced stuff. We will not be defining MRV at this conference. If you don't know what MRV is, don't buy tickets. Do buy tickets, learn that shit, and then show up with really advanced questions, because we're going to be taking it to the next level. Why? Because you get a bunch of free stuff from myself and Steve on the internet anyway. You can just listen to this podcast, the Q&A weekly stuff, for free. You can read a bunch of books that I've written for very minimal amounts of money. You can read articles for free. We're charging you guys money for this, which means we're going to give you your money's worth. We're going to go very quickly ascend right into really advanced shit. So come with your fucking, I don't know, I was going to say reading cap. That doesn't make any sense. Your thinking cap, right? Make sure that you come ready for advanced stuff, because it will be delivered. That's the big promise I can make. But on the other hand, if you raising your hand every now and again and being like, so what's MRV? We will explain it to you, but then very briefly, and then we will leave your ass behind with other concepts that you're like, wait, what the fuck is all this other shit? This is an advanced seminar. It's an advanced conference, which is a huge benefit of it, but also make sure that you're ready for this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And you want that. And I think the audience will want that as well. So yeah, definitely sign up. And I may even email out all of these kind of the more basic concepts that Mike's come out with. I'll probably put them out on the email list. So anyone signed up to that, sign up to it. I'll send them out and I'll put all the links there as well, because I think that'll be really helpful to everyone on there.
Cool.
Cheers, guys. Take care.